Okay. Is my voice okay? Okay, we can start now, right? Okay. So, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good morning. Welcome to International Scientific Webinar 2024. My name is Syahmi Ilyas. I am the Science Officer at the Institute of System Biology in BISIS, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia. Thank you for joining. We are excited to host this webinar, this event that are organized by Persatuan Pegawai Sains Malaysia. And I think I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate the teams for organizing this knowledge sharing session, I think every month. If I'm not mistaken, this is the 6th webinar for this year. And if you would like to watch our previous webinar, you can go to our YouTube channel, Persatuan Pegawai Sains Malaysia, and you can find all the recordings available for you to watch. And we actually have invited many interesting speakers, and we discuss a lot of interesting topics also. To name a few, on the previous topic is the biological waste management, the assessment in clinical laboratory, chemical waste management, novel approach in the diagnosis of HCV, and the latest one last month is on the IVF fertility. So, and you can go to our YouTube channel and watch. And you are also welcome to give any feedback, comments or suggestions if you have any topics that you think we should bring on this webinar, or you have any suggestion on the speakers that we should invite, just reach out to us. So for today, I am very excited to moderate this webinar on the topic of chemical health risk assessment, CHRA, because I actually personally have been attended the course with NIOSH, and I think it was a very eye-opening subject, and I learned a lot from the topics. And I hope our viewers today can also be benefited from the sharing by our speakers. So please allow me to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Vivien Hau. So Dr. Vivien Hau holds a PhD in environmental health and serves as a senior lecturer in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health at the Faculty of Medicine and Health Sciences, Universiti Putra, Malaysia. She is a registered chemical health risk assessor with the Department of Occupational Safety and Health and a registered environmental health officer with the Ministry of Health Malaysia. She is also an accredited trainer with the Malaysia Red Crescent Society and HRD Corp. Dr. Hau is also an IRDR Young Scientist and an active member of the Young Scientist Network, Academy Science Malaysia. She also serves as the President of Persatuan Inisiatif Sihat Selamat Malaysia. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Dr. Vivien to today's webinar. I hope I'm not taking too much time here. So without further ado, the importance of chemical health risk assessment in the laboratory. Dr. Vivien Hau, over to you.
Thank you very much, moderator. Before I start the sessions, I would like to have one request. May I have the technical team to help to share my slide, because apparently my computer having the technical problem. So if you can take over the slide.
Is Mr. Zakwan here? I think Dr. Vivien is lost in the connection. Is she? I think Dr. Vivien has a problem with the connection. Is Dr. Vivien here? Can the technical team help with Dr. Vivien? This didn't happen during the rehearsal just now. I don't know why suddenly the connection is lost. Is Dr. Vivien okay? You all can just stay here. We are waiting for Dr. Vivien to join our session. So I can see there are about 183 participants. Thank you for joining our webinar. As I mentioned just now, we organize this webinar every month. So, and we also have the recordings of the webinar in our YouTube channel, Persatuan Pegawai Sains Malaysia. You can have a watch on our webinar. We are still trying to get Dr. Vivien. So our technical team, Mr. Zakwan, is trying to solve the issue.
Assalamualaikum and good afternoon. I hope that you can hear me now. Sorry for the
Yeah, we
internet
can hear you, Dr.
problem.
Vivien.
Thank you very much. So sorry, I hope that thanks for still waiting for the sessions. So I think to reduce any hiccups happens again, may I request the organizer to help me to control my slide so that I would have some reduce of the technical problems from my end again. Now, again, Assalamualaikum. My name is Vivien. Thanks for moderator to introduce myself a little bit. I'm very passionate to share about today's topic. The CHRA that you see on the screen is what we name by the Chemical Health Risk Assessment. And I think this topic is very important because this is where they lead us to understand the lab chemical safety and health awareness, and also then lead to ultimately the health risk assessment. I believe that in front of me, most of you, if not all, are taking the position as the science officer. So all of you are actually the frontliner who somehow every day direct and indirectly exposed to all the hazardous health effects from the chemicals you order, you use, you prepare, and you dispose. So in the next 40 minutes, I hope I can guide you further on what to expect in the chemical health assessment under Malaysia DOSH requirement, and what should you do as the frontliner for all these hazardous chemicals in your lab. So next slide. Okay, so in this slide, before we start, let's do the quick quiz. Which one of these items are considered as the chemical hazard that as a science officer that you need to taking care of? Leave your answer in the chat box. It could be more than one number. You just number which one you think is relevant. Which one of these you think that, oh, this is definitely under my portfolio, the chemical that I need to take care as a science officer? Which one of them is? Type your answer in the chat box. So let's count down for 10 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you for all of you who answer my question, I want you to leave that answer to yourself, because we are going to come back on later on as we journey through on what is exactly chemical health risk assessment and which one of these are considered the chemical health risk that me as a science officer who are the frontliner in front of all these chemicals that we need to take care. So to be more exact, number one is those chemical reagents that we use in the lab. Number two is those chemicals that you can easily grab in the hardware shop, WD-40, color spray. Sometimes you will leave one or two in the lab for the maintenance purposes, grease, oil, or whatnot. Number three is the hand sanitizer. Number four is the detergent or the cleaning agent. Number five is the chemical disinfectants, where we use frequently ever since, especially after the pandemic. Number six is perfume. Now, we understand that all of these are considered chemical, but which one of them exactly are the type of the chemical that, as a science officer, that I need to take care under the OSH regulation, or it has to be taken under the CHRA perspective. All right, so next slide. Okay, before we dive further, I want to brief you a little bit on the legislation in Malaysia. Now, under Malaysian legislation, when it comes to the chemical and also the enforcement agency, that involve more than one agency. That include different agency what governs the importations of the chemical, manufacturing, supply, and handling of the chemical, disposal of the chemical until the emergency response. Now, what are we concerned here is there are three main types of the chemical that we often use in the lab and we consume most. Number one is any industrial use chemical. So if that is the industrial use chemical, that fall under Ministry of Human Resource, because that is governed by DOSH, Department of Occupational Safety and Health, industrial use chemical. So we will redefine back what is industrial use chemical later on. And the second one is pesticide. Let's say if your organizations are using pesticide as a approach for pest control, for instance. Now, pesticide is governed under the Ministry of Agriculture. So, memandangkan pesticide is governed under Ministry of Agriculture, adakah as a science officer, we need to take care of the pesticide as well? Keep that question to yourself. Number three is any petroleum products. That any petroleum program is governed under the Ministry of Domestic Trade. But again, if my company or my organization, my lab, storing any petroleums or any diesel for the machine or whatnot, do I need to report the petroleum products? Okay, and if the chemical that transport out from your lab, when the chemical are transport on the road, tak kisahlah on the road ke, in the ship ke, dalam flight ke, dalam kereta api ke, dalam train ke, this chemical is governed under Ministry of Transportation. And if any chemical is pharmaceutical product, for example, your cosmetic product, your hair shampoo, your body shampoo or whatnot, all these are pharmaceutical product that governs under Ministry of Health. So maksudnya, anything that you can easily find that in the Watson or in the drugstore, in the Guardian store, all of these are literally considered as a pharmaceutical product. So pharmaceutical product is governed under Ministry of Health. Okay, and what we concern now is there are four main regulations that we concern now. Number one is OSH, use and standard of chemical hazardous to health. Number two is OSH, control of industrial major accident hazard. Number three is the OSH, class regulation, classification, packaging, labeling of the chemical. And the last one is environmental quality schedule waste regulation. And how does this fall relevant to each other when I talk about the chemical health risk assessment? Let's go to the next slide. Okay, now, before we dive further, I want to get you to understand one thing. Chemical, saya selalu bagi tahu ada tiga perangai. Have three types of the behavior. Number one is what we call health hazard. So the number one is whereas whenever the chemical having the health hazard, it's fall under the OSH, use and standard of chemical hazardous to health. Kesehatan. So these are the common pictogram that you will found. Health hazard means to say any of the chemical that will likely to cause effect to human health, regardless whether that is an acute or chronic health effect, local or systemic health effect. As long as it's affecting human health, that is the health hazard. There's another perangai of the chemical we call the having the physical hazard. Physical hazard, for example, okay, so just now the health hazard example, like it is carcinogen, it is mutagenic, it is irritant, it is a sensitization, it is acute toxicity. All of these are considered health hazard. So tak kisah dia acute or chronic health effect. but it's a health hazard. So if this chemical having the perangai of health hazard, it fall under the OSH use and standard of chemical hazardness to health. Okay, and if the chemical having the physical hazard, let's say the chemical are flammable, oxidizing, explosive. In a layman term, we say perangai yang panas baran, sikit-sikit dah meletup dah. So this kind of behavior we fall under the physical hazard. Any chemical having the physical hazard, you will commonly found them having this pictogram. So this pictogram indicate that this chemical having the physical hazard. Whenever the chemical having the physical hazard, it's fall under the OSH control of industrial major accident hazard regulation. There's another perangai of the chemical that you can easily find, which is the environmental hazard. So whenever the chemical having the environmental hazard, it fall under environmental quality schedule waste regulation. So any chemical that you use in the lab, they usually have three perangai: health hazard, physical hazard, and the environmental hazard. Different hazards are governed by different regulation. That's number one that you need to know. Number two is, when we talk about the chemical health risk assessment, we concerning about the health, the kesihatan perspective. So meaning to say, if the chemical they're having the physical hazard, for example, flammable, oxidizing, gases under pressure, or explosive, all these are fall under the OSH control of industrial major accidents hazard. So meaning to say, when you conduct the CHRA, chemical health risk assessment, you are supposed to concern only on the chemical which have the health hazard. Physical hazard, perangai yang sikit-sikit meletup, sikit-sikit marah, sikit-sikit tak suka ini, tak suka itu, that kind of physical hazard, it fall under CHRA regulation. Because under the CHRA regulation, we talk about the emergency response plan. Okay, so that's a difference. Number three, any chemical that listed under environmental hazard is chemical that will cause the hazardous effect to the environment and to the human health. All right, so schedule waste. And for your information, all these chemicals, number one, number two, or number three, regardless of which hazard they are, they need to comply to OSH class regulation, classification, packaging, labeling of the hazardous chemical. All right, next slide. And why do I say this? Can we go to the next slide? Okay. So if you look at this, you can somehow understand, oh, so these are the chemicals that I need to govern, so I need to take care as a science officer under the OSH requirement. Number one is where the chemical produced. The moment where you decide to purchase the chemical for use in your lab, you need to ensure two things: safety label and the safety data sheet. So these two things is required as the pre-requirement to conduct the CHRA. All right, I will tell you what happened later on. So whenever you purchase any product as a science officer, as a frontliner, you need to know what kind of chemical that you are purchasing by understand you beli product apa. So just like the example, today you feel like eating keropok, that's it lah. So you will go to the store and then you will buy keropok. So you will look at the items. Oh, this nutritional value, after I eating this, I have a high sodium, high cholesterol, high sodium, high gula, high garam, all of this. So same things when it comes to the chemical. Under the OSH class regulation, it stated that whenever people, the company who produce the chemical, they have to give you two things. Number one is they have to give you the safety label, the one that you always got in the chemical labeling. Number two is they need to provide the updated safety data sheet. So these are the two things that get you as the end user to understand what is the chemical background, what is the type of the chemical that you buy to purchase that use in your lab. That's number one. After you purchase the chemical, then you will use and handle the chemical. So when you decide to use and handle the chemical in the lab, any chemical that poses the health hazard that fall under OSH use regulation. Any chemical that have the physical hazard that fall under the OSH CHRA regulation, which is like I mentioned just now. Okay, so now think about the 100 and 200 chemicals that register under your lab. Which one is physical hazard? Which one is health hazard? Those that are health hazard is fall under use regulation. Those that fall under the use regulation, automatically, these are the chemicals that you need to register to perform chemical health risk assessment. That is the first message. Okay, the second message. Once after you use the chemical, saya belum habis. Sorry. Once after you use the chemical, then you have to dispose the chemical. When you dispose the chemical, those that register as a schedule waste, any chemical that register as a schedule waste, this chemical you need to use to conduct chemical health risk assessment as well, because these are the chemical, even though they're disposed, they contain the health effect. Then you transport the chemical, and when you transportation of the chemical, they fall under different regulation, and then you register the chemical. Bear in mind that registry of chemical, there are two categories. One is the product registration as an industrial chemical under DOS requirement. Another one is, even though let's say I make the hair cream product, so the hair cream product, the company who make the hair cream product, they will go through 1, 2, 3. That will use the chemical to produce the hair cream product and work. But end up, the hair cream product is not fall under the industrial chemical. This is a pharmaceutical product. So that's why the labeling is different. So that also means that any cosmetic product that register under pharmaceutical product or cosmetic product registration under KKM do not need to go through CHRA. So that is the second message. Next. And many times we will ask ourselves, what are the chemicals that hazardous to health? The chemical hazardous to health that needed to conduct the chemical health assessment are any chemical that are in the form of aerosol. WD-40 that you spray, color spray that you spray, aerosol. Any chemical that are in the fiber form, gaseous form, liquid form, even the granule form, paste form, pellet form, powder, slurry, or solid. All of these chemicals, even though they are not in liquid form, because the one that we usually encounter in the lab is in the liquid form. Now, for your information, you might ever encounter any of the CHRA assessor comes to you and say that, this chemical, you need to conduct CHRA. And you will feel like, why? This is a paste, this is a pellet, this is only a solid, this is a granule this is not chemical. For your information, when we say chemical, it doesn't mean that it has to be in the liquid form. It could be in any physical form. Next slide. As long as this chemical involved in either one of these usage. So it could be a byproduct. Let's say your lab are doing something that relevant to wood. So your lab in the university, you are handling wood and you are cutting wood. Whenever you are cutting wood, the wood is not chemical, but the wood will release the wood dust. So that wood dust is a byproduct, right? So the byproduct of the wood dust, is considered a chemical that need to perform chemical health risk assessment because of the dust. So let's say you are doing something in the lab, and then some of the chemical that would release vapor or solvent. So that is the intermediate or the byproduct. Now, for your information, the liquid of the chemical is a product or the raw material that need to conduct CHRA. And the intermediate product or the byproduct that you need to consider to perform CHRA as well. So Takisa, byproduct, intermediate product, raw material, or any chemical that's stored. We understand the fact that if you're working in the university, especially, if you are from the research lab particularly, some of the chemical will be stored for like decades, 5 years and above. And then we cannot dispose because the research is ongoing. So, and then you might say that we are not using this chemical. This chemical are just stored there for good because we don't know when does the research will finish. So you are not going to dispose this chemical. But the fact is, as long as you are storing the chemical in the lab, in your working territory, this chemical, even though they've been storing there, sitting there, not using that, you still need to conduct a CHRA. And any waste, especially scheduled waste that you dispose out from the chemical. So this chemical, after they dispose, you will handle them as a scheduled waste, right? So this scheduled waste, you need to conduct chemical health risk assessment. Any cleaning product, any degreaser, any other application that relevant to the above mentioned, you need to perform the chemical health risk assessment. So whenever we mention the necessary to conduct chemical health risk assessment, we don't mean only the chemical that in the liquid. We mean all of this. It depends on the usage of the chemical and also depends on the type of the chemical. Next slide. So we have to understand two things. Just now we mentioned setiap chemical ada perangai dia, right? So the chemical perangai is like the hazard, something that can potentially cause harm, right? So you buy a chemical. Let's say you buy benzene today, and then the benzene is something that compulsory to use for certain process. So you buy benzene. So benzene is carcinogen. That self is hazard. In a chemical health risk assessment, we don't only look into the hazard. Okay, your perangai is not something that isolate me to work with you. Your perangai is your hazard. But what we concern is the exposure, because in CHRA, we doesn't name that as a chemical health hazard assessment. We name that as a chemical health risk assessment. So how do we as a CHRA assessor to evaluate the risk level? The way that we evaluate the risk level is depends on, we will ask a few questions. What are the chemicals that you use? So now they understand your background. This chemical, the hazard background is carcinogen, is irritant, is corrosive. So the hazard is only your perangai. But we want to look at the exposure. The exposure is the question that we will ask. How much you will use? Every day I only use a liter. Only a little amount that I use. And that little amount I can use for a month. Oh, so you are used very little. The exposure background. How long you have been using? How much will you use, and in what circumstances you use? When I use the chemical under the fume hood. So then the next thing that we will ask is, what is the control measure of the fume hood? How well you manage and control the fume hood so to ensure that the chemical won't direct expose to you. So again, you can use benzene in the lab, no problem, even though we know that it's a carcinogen. And of course, the best is if you can replace benzene with some other thing. If you say that, no, we are the research lab, benzene is the only chemical that we can use to do the analytic, then fine, proceed. Now, what the CHRA assessor will do is, we will suggest on how to safely use the benzene to reduce the risk level. So then it also means that what are we going to suggest is, we are going to suggest you how do you reduce the exposure background, because hazard is something that we cannot change. I cannot change you from pendiam into talkative. I cannot change you from introvert to extrovert. Hazard is something that when the moment you buy the chemical, it's already there. Cannot change, but I can change the exposure. For example, let's say reduce the time of using enhance the control measure, or even wearing the PPE so that you do not need to direct contact with the chemical. So that is why when it comes to CHRA, we concern of the chemical health risk assessment. We are not doing the health hazard assessment. We are not like ambil you punya STS, do the assessment. No. We will ask a lot of questions. We will do the risk assessment. We will go through, because we wanted to ensure that the exposure management that you manage at your lab is on the par. Next slide. Okay, so the chemical will enter into our body through 4 routes of exposure: inhalation, that you inhale the chemical; dermal contact, either through the skin contact or the eye contact; injection, you terminum, termakan, or injection, you chuchuk. Now, terminum and termakan, I give you the example. The other day, this might not applicable in the lab. So in the industry, so in this one industry, I will say that, Vivien, our industry are prohibited. There's a QC lab in the industry. Our QC lab is prohibited eating and food eating and drinking. But when I walk in the lab, this is what I see. Ada kopi O kau-kau ikat tepi kantongkan lab punya machine. This is what we call injection contact. So there are chances of injection, cuma mungkin low. But when we say how do the chemical could enter into your body, there are 4 things that we concerns: dermal contact, skin or eye; respiratory, inhalation; injection or injection contact. Next. So in CHRA, when we perform the CHRA, we perform all. We perform inhalation assessment, dermal assessment, and injection assessment. Next. Okay, now do a quick one. You can type your answer in the chat box, whether it's a scenario 1 or scenario 2. So scenario 1 is whereas we say the doses. Okay, scenario 1 is you are working with a strong solvent remover and exposed to high concentration of solvent, and you're working in a small room with no ventilations and no PPE. Okay, and the next one is you are working with the same solvent outdoor and not using PPE. Which is which? Which one you think is the most hazardous? Scenario 1 or scenario 2? Let's receive the answer in 10 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so thanks for all of you who are answering the questions and joining the interactive session. Scenario 1 is whereas you would directly get the acute exposure, because it is like immediate acute exposure. All right, because you are in a small room, no ventilation, no PPE, and there is a high concentration. So you will immediately got the effect, scenario 1. That is what we call acute effect. But scenario 2 is whereas you guna the same solvent, same concentration, but since you don't have any control measures, so you ask your staff to work outdoor. So no PPE, but same solvent. Workers who are handling this out of the chemical in scenario 1, they will immediately got the acute effect. Workers who are using scenario 2, because of the reason you don't have the PPE, you don't have the control measure, you ask them to handle the chemical outside, they will still got the health effect, but chronic accumulative health effect. So the acute health effect is, for example, today you are using one chemical. After you're using the chemical, you will feel itchiness. You will feel every time when you go to the lab, you will feel like you will feel itchiness, you will feel redness, you will have like gatal hidung, you akan rasa demam, you akan rasa pening. Scenario 1. That is where your body are telling you that, Tuan, this chemical is hazardous, I don't like it, acute effect. Scenario 2 is you will smell the solvent odor. When people say, are you okay? No, okay, I'm fine. Day by day, your body are smelling that. So that is an accumulative chronic health effect. So in the layman term, scenario 1 is acute. Scenario 2 is chronic. Both of these are equally hazard, but one is you immediately got the effect. Another one is you will slowly got the effect, but you will never know. Oh, rupanya, the way that I handle the chemical, even though it's scenario 2, will cause me into certain health effect in another 10 or 20 years. All right, so next. So the chemical effect on the body would depend on many factors. The chemical toxicity, which means the hazard background, the dose, the concentration, and the quantity. The route of exposure, how does the chemical go into your body? The physical form of the chemical, meaning to say whether the chemical in the liquid form, in the dust form, in the form, in the pellet form, in the granule form, in the gas form, in the vapor form, the physical form of the chemical. And the last one is the susceptible group. So why do we wanted to perform the chemical health risk assessment? Because when we perform the chemical health risk assessment, this is whereas we perform by we identify the risk level of each of the chemical that you use at your workplace. I mean, each of the chemical, we will consider point 1, the item 1 to item 5. So who will do that? The chemical health assessment will do that. So what will they do? They will check your STS to get number 1. They will ask questions. They will look at your flow chart. They will ask a lot of, for you, it's like stupid and a lot of tedious questions. How come ask so many questions one? So because you wanted to understand how much dose that you use, how do you handle the chemical? If you are saying that you might even ask that, what is the volume of the pipette that you use? You want to know the quantity, concentration, and dose. We wanted to know the route of exposure. We will ask when you handle the chemical is under the fume hood or away from the fume hood. We will ask whether you will turn on the fume hood. We will want to know that what is the control measure. We want to check your PP. We want to ensure that whether your PP is on the right spec so that you don't direct chemical and everything. So we want to check the physical form of the chemical, and also we will ask whether there is a susceptible group. For example, your age, your sex, your weight, whether you are pregnant, whether you are smoker or whatnot. So all of these, who will do that for you? The CHRA assessor. Because all you know is the chemical toxicity. All we wanted to know to help you to reduce the risk and identify the risks through the chemical health assessment. And how do we do that? Next slide. Okay, so in order for us to do the CHI, there are 4 types of the chemical that would include. Number 1 is any chemical that lists under Schedule 1 or 2 of the use regulation. So it means that any chemical that listed as the health hazard, kesihatan, the health hazard under the use regulation, then you need to perform CHI. Number 2, any chemical that's certified that specified under the health hazard under class regulation, then you need to perform CHI. Number 3, any chemical that defined as a pesticide under Pesticide Act, you need to perform CHI. Number 4, any chemical which is a scheduled waste, then you need to perform CHI. And when we say use, under the regulation of use and standard of chemical hazardous to health, the term use, penggunaan, it means that during production, process, handling, storage, transportation, removal, disposal, even treatment. Meaning to say, if your plant, you have a safe wastewater treatment plant. So what is the chemical that you put in the wastewater treatment plant to treat the water also? That chemical considered a chemical. Okay, so that is what we name as the chemical health risk assessment, the type of the chemical that you need to include in the chemical health risk assessment. Next slide. Now, if I ask you again, all right, after listening to the 12th slide before, which one of the chemical that you think you need to include in the CHRA under OSH regulation? Type your answer in the chat box. So I give 20 seconds this time. 1, 5, some say or, some 1, 5, some or 1 and 5. Okay. Count down 10 seconds. 10, 4, 10, 4 pula. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Time's up. Okay, time's up. So, ladies and gentlemen, the frontliner of each of the laboratory in Malaysia, the type of the chemical that you need to govern under the chemical health assessment that need to be included under the chemical health assessment, or that you can consider as a chemical hazard at the workplace. Let's put it this way. The type of the chemical considered the chemical hazard at the workplace: number 1, any chemical agent. Number 2, if your lab storing any WD-40, grease remover, color spray, all of these, they are considered industry use chemical. And if you are using this chemical for any routine maintenance activity, number 2 is can consider as a chemical hazard in the lab under OSHA. Number 3 is the hand sanitizer. Same goes to number 6, is a perfume. So number 3 and number 6 is whereas the chemical will register under KKM. So it also means that any chemical that register under KKM of National Pharmaceutical Board do not need to go through CHRA, because this is a pharmaceutical product. So as I mentioned just now, any chemical that you can easily find when you walk in the Watson or Guardian or any drugstore, that consider, even though inside we know it's a chemical, it's an alcohol inside, it's a solvent inside, perfume got solvent inside, but this already registered under the KKM. So that is under KKM jurisdiction. 1, 2, 4, and 5. What types of the chemical that you choose to clean the detergent? What type of the chemical that you choose to clean the workbench? And number 5, the chemical disinfectant. 1, 2, 4, 5. Congratulations for those who answered it. Is the one that consider the chemical hazard at the workplace. 3 and 6 bukan. Okay, so next slide. So how do we conduct the CHRA so that you have some idea on how do we conduct a CHRA? Number 1 is to select the assessor. How do we select the assessor? You can go to the MyKKP website and then can, based on the state that you are coming from, and then choose the assessor that ngam you the most. So that is the employer duty to choose the assessor. After they choose the assessor, they have to gather the information. The information that we meant that we want to gather here are STS, our work procedures, and how much you've been using, any engineering control and whatnot, and then we will divide into the work unit. The assessor will divide into the work unit, and then we will determine the degree of the hazard. How do we determine the degree of the hazard? We look into the STS, we look into what is the perangai of each of the chemical. All right, and then we assess the exposure. So we will look around, we will have to walk through and then ask how much you use the chemical, how you use the chemical, what types of tools that you are using the chemical, what type of PPE that you are wearing when you handle the chemical, what are the control measures? Are you turning on the standing fan, or are you turning on the exhaust fan, or are you turning on the LEV fume hood, anything. So that is where we assess the exposure background. Then we come to identify the risk level. After we identify the risk level, we will determine whether the control measure that I assessed just now is adequate or not. So that is the assessor duty in the CHRA report. Okay, next slide. So And it all depends on that there are 3 risk levels that we consider here. Number 1 is we want to know whether there is any inhalation risk. Number 2 is whether any dermal risk. Number 3 is if there any possibility of ingestion. If so, then we will do the assessment accordingly. So for one chemical, it may be for you it's just a chemical, but for us is we will look through into the hazard background and what are the potential risk level. Next. Okay, then we will do the action priority by given the numbering. So there are the zoning system that I put up here. The red zone is where as I name action priority 1. The yellow is action priority 2 and the green is action priority 3. Action priority 1, it's mean that the risk level is high, but the control measure is inadequate. Okay, so action priority is by hood or by crook, you need to immediately do something to rectify that. So you got the action priority 1. When you receive the report, you got the action priority 2, the yellow color, it means that the risk level is moderate or low, but, and again, the control measure is not adequate. Number 3 is whereas, even though the risk level is very high, you are using benzene, and then you are using using the benzene, and then you more or less like every day you're using the benzene, and every day you are using the benzene at least 4 hours to 5 hours and above. So it's very high risk. But if let's say your control measure is adequate, everything is well controlled, well managed, then even though your risk level is high, moderate, or low, the action priority is 3. So dear frontliner, what I mean here is when we conduct the CHRA, our tujuan bukan nak suruh awak stop using certain chemical, even though if possible, we wanted to eliminate a certain hazardous chemical use. But our job as a CHRA assessor is to identify the risk level of each chemical by looking at the hazard background and the exposure background, and also assess the adequacy of your current control measure to determine the action priority, whether this is the action priority 1, 2, or 3. All right, so that I hope that here that we clarify what is expected from the CHRA report. Next. And why CHRA is important? Because again, we identify the hazard, we look at the exposure background, we evaluate the exposure background, then only we come to the level of risk. And the level of risk is only the risk level. It could be high risk, it could be moderate risk. Even though that is a high risk, but if your control measure is on top, very highly recommended, well managed, action priority will go to 3 and you can still using the benzene, no problem. Okay, next. So what do we do here actually? You see, the chemical hazardous to health, meaning kesihatan, there are 4 types of the chemical that are concerned. Number 1 is any chemical that stated under the Schedule 1 and 2 OSH use regulation, any chemical that is health hazard, or chemical that is listed in first schedule of class regulation, health hazard, any pesticide, or any chemical which is environmental quality first schedule, which is like the schedule waste. All of these are the chemicals that I need to go through the chemical health risk assessment because they are the chemical hazardous to health. That's number 1. Number 2, use regulation. The U here is mean any chemical that involve in production, process, handle, storage, transport, disposal, and the treatment. And CHRA report tak masuk chemical which is a radioactive material because there is other regulation. Tak termasuk chemical which is foodstuff. Tak masuk chemical which is like if you are using foodstuff of the chemical, then kita tak masuk. Contoh you kata I guna garam untuk cuci lantai. Can or not? So that garam is a foodstuff, right? Kita tak kacau because that is a foodstuff that under food regulation. Any chemical with physical property, for example, flammable, oxidizing, explosive, tak masuk dalam CHRA. Any chemical which already categorized as a pharmaceutical product, tak akan termasuk dalam CHRA. So, apa yang berlaku selepas CHRA adalah, what happened after the CHRA is, CHRA assessor will go suggest 4 things. Number 1 is, they will suggest whether you need to go through the chemical exposure monitoring by the hygiene technician 1. So dia jarang you terus pergi minta hygiene technician 1 datang, jarang. Usually it's based on the CHRA report, then we suggest whether you need to go for the chemical monitoring by hygiene tech 1. Okay, Or we will suggest by the CHRA assessor where you will need the hygiene technician tool to inspect, testing, and examining your LEV, your fume hood, or any of the engineering control equipment. Number 3 is, based on the CHRA, we will suggest whether you need to go through the medical surveillance by a OHD or not. So meaning to say, hygiene technician 1, hygiene technician 2, or OHD, occupational health doctor, they are doing their task by depending on the first CHRA report. Why? Because contoh, kalau dalam lab tu ada 50 ke 100 chemical, it is impossible for the hygiene tech 1, hygiene technician 1 to jump in and do the exposure assessment for 100 chemical. And same goes to the hygiene tech 2. So hygiene tech 1 or hygiene technician 2, they will do their job based on the CHRA report. CHRA report has to start first. Medical surveillance, doctor, occupational health doctor, there will, if any of the disease or the health effect is because of the chemical, OHD will ask you to show them the CHRA report. Why? Because based on the CHRA report, they wanted to know that which chemical, what are the health hazards of the chemical. Your CHRA assessor already buat dah. Dalam 100 chemical tu, 50 chemical high risk, 25 chemical moderate risk, another 25 chemical low risk. So I wanted to, if I wanted to know that your skin symptoms are from which chemical, that is where they will look into the action priority 1 chemical or the chemical which is a health hazard or health risk. All right, so it all started from a CHRA report or the action of the chemical health risk assessment. Next slide. Okay, so I will go through very brief and tell you what the hygiene tech 1, hygiene tech 2, and the OHD do. All right, each one of them have a different guideline, and all of these guideline is to refer to the OSH, use and standard of the chemical hazardous to health, kesihatan. So you can see here that the hygiene tech 1, what they are doing is the airborne monitoring of the chemical hazardous to, again, health, kesihatan. All right, and this hygiene tech 2 is whereas they do the inspection, testing, and examination of the LEV, any of the exhaust system or any of the engineering control to control the chemical, hygiene tech 2. So any health surveillance or the medical surveillance that is under the medical surveillance guideline of 2023, that is OHD. All right, so let's dive into deeper so that you can differentiate on the difference. Next slide. Okay, so when is the necessary that a CHRA assessor will suggest for the exposure monitoring or the medical surveillance or the engineering control? Next. So usually what happens is CEM or the chemical exposure monitoring is whereas if let's say after the CHRA report, after my report, during our walkthrough assessment that we realized that we wanted to test whether a certain chemical need a baseline. So whenever I think that need a baseline and then the risk level is high, control measure, the risk level is high. So then I will ask to perform the CM. Or the second one is whenever I wanted to ensure the maintenance of the control measure. Let's say in a situation where we thought that the chemical is high risk and the control measure that currently used is only the exhaust fan, for example. But based on my observation and my professional judgment, I think the exhaust fan is not adequate enough. And I wanted to suggest you, instead of using the exhaust fan, I want to suggest you to install the LEV or the fume hood, for example. But I can't simply ask you to install the LEV without give you a certain baseline. What I do is I will suggest that can we perform the chemical exposure monitor on this chemical so that we could cross-check and ensure that if you are using this chemical, which is high hazard and health risk, whether it's still relevant to use the fume hood, to use the exhaust fan. Adakah perlunya waktu untuk tukar LEV, contohnya. But if let's say I want to suggest for the CEM also, I need to ensure that dia ada cara untuk measure. There need to be a validated method and to analyze by hygiene tech 1. So senang cerita, hygiene tech 1, they will come in, they will ask the first thing, mana CHRA report. The second thing is they will go to the CHRA report, they will go to the section where I write the exposure monitoring, they will look at the validated method, they will just unpair the sample. You see why, you get what I mean? So this is where CM. Jangan bazir duit terus pergi buat CM unless that is necessary written in the CHRA report. Next slide. If you have any question, just type your question in the chat box. I will come back to that later on. So after the CHRA risk assessment, then there are two ways that we need to determine whether you need the exposure monitoring. Number one is if I need to ensure the effectiveness of the control measure. Number two, if the level of the risk is moderate to high. And that is the available method. If there is no method, I cannot simply ask you to do the exposure monitoring on, let's say, benzene. And then the hygiene, that one, knowing that benzene has no valid method, then they can't proceed further. I just make it up. Benzene are the valid method. Okay, just name any chemical which don't have the valid method. Then you cannot proceed to exposure monitoring. All right. Then instead of doing the exposure monitoring, we would suggest to do the biological monitoring. For example, like if you are exposing to pesticide. So instead of doing the exposure monitoring on the pesticide, by pasang the S sampling bank that I highlight here, we would suggest to do a biological monitoring, whereas to ambil the urine or the blood sample to look at the blood cholinesterase level. Siapa yang buat? OHT yang buat. Ataupun mana-mana lab yang boleh buat cholinesterase monitoring. Next slide. So that is on the hygiene tab 1. So duty of the CA assessor is, again, we need to identify the necessary exposure monitoring, and then kalau perlu, baru kita akan cadangkan medical surveillance. You have to bear in mind, medical surveillance that I meant here, it could be baseline health examination, it could be the health examination, it could be the medical surveillance. Okay, under OSHA, there are few hazards that you need to go through medical surveillance. Exposure to noise, exposure to heat, exposure to ergonomic problem, exposure to chemical. Chemical is only one of that. Under the guideline of medical surveillance, dia cerita semua. Cuma chemical is one component of that. So let's say, touch wood, the result keluar, your exposure monitoring, the level more than or half of the permissible exposure limit. In the report, CHRA assessor need to cadangkan for the medical surveillance. Go next. Next. Okay, so you can see here, the medical surveillance bila kita akan cadangkan, when let's say ada pekerja complain. Tuan, lepas saya guna chemical ini, saya start ada masalah pening lah, saya datang kerja saya akan sesama lah, saya datang kerja saya akan allergic hidung, kadar hidung lah, saya punya skin allergy lah, saya susah bernafas lah, saya selalu demam lah, nak ambil MC lah. Ada complain daripada workers berkaitan dengan chemical use, then you need to suggest whether they need to go through the medical surveillance. How do we know? That's why during the CHRA, assessor akan tanya, pekerja lain kita buat walkthrough on the type of the chemical that you are using and how you use, kita akan interview pekerja. And we will ask question on whether they develop any symptoms, whether there is any complaint. If do, then we will highlight the chemical and then we might suggest a medical surveillance if that is a valid technique. Number 2, if the chemical leaves under Schedule 2 of use regulation. Number 3, if there is a systemic effect through the skin absorption. Number 4, if there is any chemical hazardous to health where the level of the risk, just now when I identify, is moderate to high. And during the air monitoring or the exposure monitoring by hygiene tag 1, lebih daripada 50% TWA ataupun dah memang lebih PL. Ataupun result of the biological monitoring more than the biological exposure index, immediately I will suggest for the medical surveillance. So all of these, CHRA assessor need to tell in the report. So CHRA report to the next counter, next counter, next counter. Okay. Next. Can we go next? You see under the guideline of the medical surveillance, I highlight those that are relevant. Belum lagi sayang. Slide sebelum ini. Sabar. Okay. So, if you look at this, allow and assist the OH2 to visit the workplace to investigate blah, 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 to relevant monitoring and other health effect data such as CHRA report. CHRA report, exposure monitoring report. Biological monitoring report and others. Okay, and then highlight number G, saya highlight, allow the employee under the medical removal program. Medical removal program contohnya kalau you pregnant, kalau you ada masalah kesihatan, and then you go through the medical surveillance, you adalah layak untuk go through the medical removal. Under medical removal is mean that you boleh tak payah nak kerja kat tempat tu. You like daripada Department of Analytical Lab, you go to other lab. Okay, CHTH yang you tengok di sini adalah chemical hazardous to health of concern. So maksudnya, let me quickly type in the chat box. Don't know, can I type? Okay, so MRP meaning to say medical removal program. So maksudnya, let's say if you are pregnant and then and you are handling chemical and you are pregnant, you have the right to, through the CHRA report, you highlight that and then you can remove from tempat kerja. CHTH meaning to say chemical hazardous to health. So that's why we name CHTH. And then you tengok review the workplace control measure, including but not limited to organizational control and all. So duty of the medical surveillance adalah I need to protect the worker. Sampai dah hujung dah kira. Dah sampai hujung, doktor ni dia tak akan masuk kilang. You jangan kilang ke pergi lab ke check satu-satu kimia. They won't do that. What they do is they will look at the CHR report, they will look at the CM report, and then they will cadangkan what should you do. Should I write a letter for your medical removal? Should I write a letter because you are particularly sensitive to this kind of the chemical? Okay, and the doctor will also review whether the current technical control, emergency control, chemical spillage and all is right on par. Ada faham? Okay, next slide. Sorry, I might exit a little bit of time. I hope that you don't mind. Next slide. So this is a medical surveillance program, the process flow. Sabar. Dah habis lagi. Sorry, the previous one. So this is the, okay, never mind. So this one is to tell you the guideline of the hygiene tech 2. So just now we mentioned hygiene technician 1, hygiene technician 2. So hygiene technician 1 is do the exposure monitoring. Okay, or biological monitoring. Hygiene tech 2 is whereas let's say your company ada LEV, ada fume hood, ada all these exhaust system, then hygiene tech 2 will come and do. So there are two things that I wanted to highlight here. Number one, if you look at the use regulation, under section 17, it's mentioned that it has to be inspected at the interval by no longer than 1 month by the employer. So let's say kalau lab hour ada fume hood, then tuan-tuan dan puan-puan, you have to at least keep every monthly inspection by the in-house maintenance team. But if you have the fume hood, under the regulation, you are supposed to examine and testing for the effectiveness of your fume hood no longer than 12 months by the hygiene tech 2. Okay, and each of the fume hood that you install for the purpose of the control the chemical use, you need to have the proper design, construction, and drawing by the professional engineer. Okay, next slide. I will go at very quick because I realize that there's a question. So when it comes to the risk control, under the chemical, we have ventilation. So next. So under the ventilation control, these are the example of the fume hood. So it could be a fume hood, the typical one that you usually see in the lab. It could be the slop hood. It could be the canopy. Any one of you who are working in the anatomy lab, then you will realize that the typical fume hood might not be applicable to you, but anatomy lab use a lot of formalin, which is very hazardous. So you are either installing the canopy or you are installing the downdraft ataupun side hood ataupun slop hood. It depends on the setting of your anatomy lab. So it depends on the work environment and the work scenario. Then the CHR assessor akan cadangkan, I think you need a ventilation system. But what do we do is we will suggest accordingly. Then you akan pergi jumpa engineer untuk install the spec, and then you akan suruh hygiene tech tu datang untuk test the effectiveness of alat ini, and so on. Next slide. Okay, so these are the example, typical of the LEV. You have the hood, you have the ducting, you have the air filter cleaner, you have the fan, you have the stack. Next slide. And next slide. So this is what the hygiene tech tool will do in your workplace. Okay, next slide. Okay, so these are the specs that they will do for the hygiene tech tool. They will do the temper checking for everything. Next slide. So you will got my slide later on for the PDF file, no worries. So what I wanted to re-emphasize again is that CHRA is only the beginning when we wanted to talk about the chemical management in the lab. But it has to start with the CHRA. Without the CHRA, you might not knowing what exactly the chemical risk level of each of the chemical that you use under the certain nature of work. All right, so that is the first message that I want to highlight. By using the CHRA, we were able to help you to look into the appropriateness of your technical control. CHRA report lah yang akan bagi tahu awak your technical control. For example, your engineering control sesuai ke tak? Cukup memadai ke tak? The PPE yang you guna cukup ke tak? Sesuai ke tak? Dari segi control measure tu cukup ke tak? Alright, and then kita daripada CHRA report yang kita akan cadangkan, what are the emergency response plans sekiranya ada chemical spillage, sekiranya keperluan untuk adanya emergency eye wash, keperluan untuk adanya emergency shower. Dalam CHRA report juga kita akan bagi tahu which of the chemical is at which risk level and what to do next selepas CHRA report. Okay, next slide. So these are one of the example. If any one of you ever encountered to conduct the CHRA before, this is the example that I want to show you. If let's say you dah buat CHRA, let's say I am the CHRA assessor now. In the CHRA report, we will ask them to do, let's say CM, chemical exposure monitoring, LEV testing, one by hygiene technician 1, one by hygiene technician 2. In this email is a CHRA has to redo every 5 years by default. So every 5 years, like it or not, you have to redo the CHRA. So in that 5-year times, the CHRA assessor that you appointed earlier during the first year, dia bukan lepas dapat payment, dia terus habis responsibility. That CHRA assessor need to follow up your action. What they need to do is, let's say I ask you to do CM, I ask you to do LEV. After the CM report, after the LEV, they have to come back to me. Why? Because we wanted to know whether we have to keep doing the CEM, chemical exposure monitoring, for the next 5 years, the consequent years, or you need to continue the LEV by looking at the LEV result. So the CHRA assessor is the one that need to keep consulting you during the 5-year times to guide you further on whether to continue the medical surveillance, the CM, or the LEV. So that's why in this email, you can see the LEV and CM result discussion. What they want is they already got the result based on the earlier CHRA that they did. Now they wanted to meet up to further discuss and the site verification. Okay, next. Okay, and this is important. Not many one knows that as a science officer, you guys are actually the frontliners. You guys are the one who order the chemical. You guys are the one who live with the chemical, because I think most of you are sitting in the lab. So when you are sitting in the lab, remember earlier that I mentioned about the chemical hazard. So the chemical hazard is not only the liquid. If you walk into the lab and you can smell chemical, you can smell solvent, you can smell certain chemicals, meaning to say your ventilation system might not right, and you basically are the frontliner who putting yourself at risk every day just so that people, the lab user, were able to use the chemical. You are the one who order the chemical. You are the one who use the chemical. You are the one who store the chemical. You are the one who prepare the chemical, and you are also the one who dispose the chemical. So for my beloved science officer, you have to claim your right as the chemical user in the lab. What I mean here is, first, you need to know the rights. You have the right to know the hazard background of each of the chemical that you use in your lab. Go back and check in your lab. Make sure that you know what exactly the chemical background, the hazard background of each of the chemical that sit in your lab. Number 2, you have to recognize, you have the right to recognize the possible risk could expose during your routine activity. How do you recognize the possible risk level? Talk to a CHRA assessor, engage a CHRA assessor. That is your right. You cannot live with all this chemical without knowing what is the potential risk level and my control measure is adequate or not. You cannot tell. If you ask the engineer will look at that machine and tell you, this machine is good, and then everything is good. But if you tell the CHRA assessor, we will look into the chemical hazard background and together with the engineering control to tell you exactly whether the chemical with the current control measure is right or not, what is the risk level. So that is another right that you need to claim. Number 3, always protect yourself. You have the right to protect yourself against the chemical, hazardous chemical used during your routine activity. How do you protect yourself? Through the CHRA through the CHRA report, they will tell you what are the appropriate control measure or what are the right PPE that you're supposed to use to protect yourself against the hazardous chemical. And lastly, you have the right, even under the OSHA Amendment 2022, each of the employee have the right to claim the protective equipment and the facility, engineering control facility in the workplace during a routine activities. So thanks for being the science officer, because without you, Malaysia don't have the analytical lab. But please also take care of your health, because again, the chemical hazard is either acute or chronic. Acute effect is something that every day we know that this thing we can smell, this chemical is hazardous, you got the effect. But the chronic health effect is cumulative. You don't know, after 5 or 10 years of working there, daripada tak ada allergy jadi ada allergy. Daripada tak ada what you say, morning sinus jadi ada morning sinus. Daripada tak ada skin problem jadi ada skin problem. So please claim your rights. You are the hub, and if I may, you can go to check OSH use regulation. Under the OSH use regulation, memang ada satu klausul untuk menyatakan employer are not allowed to use any chemical hazardous to health until a written assessment has been conducted by a competent person. In a layman term is, employer are not supposed to ask the employee to handle any chemical until a CHRA report has been conducted by a competent person. You can use that clause under the OSH regulation, masuk minute to claim the first rights that you can get to conduct a CHRA. Okay, next slide. All right, so I think that's all from my end. Sorry that I speak fast. I try because I see there's a few questions in the board, so I thought that if I could answer the question before you end for the break. So let me go through. Oh, before that, anyone have any question? Sorry if I talk fast. Okay, so tak tahu kenapa saya punya computer hang. Okay, do you have a CHRA report as an example to share with us? Cannot, because all the CHRA report is a PNC for the organization. So I definitely cannot share the CHRA report. But what I can tell you is a CHRA report is where it will include everything, like I mentioned just now. So if you look at because all the CHRA report is a PNC, but you can go to download. So later on, what I would do is this webinar will share in the, you have my email here. You can email me, I can email you the guideline of the CHRA report, the guideline of the CHRA manual. So inside the CHRA manual, it tells exactly what should include in the CHRA report. So it's a client report, so definitely I don't think any one of them wanted the report to be shared. Sorry for that, no Farah here. But is the PPM maintenance done regularly? Consider checking. Yes. The PPM, the maintenance done regularly, but how regular that is, they need to have the checklist of doing that. So dia macam cuci tandas, right? So kalau you cuci tandas, you kena ada like a form to tell them what exactly is the thing that you check. Other than that, a film will need to check by the hygiene tech tool, because these are the specs that will check. They will look in, they will use the anemometer, they will use the smoke trace test, they will use the manometer to check the film hood, the effectiveness. So dia akan guna alat untuk check. One is for the maintenance purpose. Under the law, you need to check that monthly. One is to check the whole spec, from the hood to the air cleaner to the air velocity, everything. That one need to have the hygiene technician tool. Okay. Air monitoring need to follow ICOP 10. All right, Muhammad Idrus. So under ICOP 10, there are two things that we mentioned here. ICOP 10 is indoor air quality guideline. Guideline for indoor air quality ICOP 10. Kalau saya tak silap, let me double check, triple check. Apa tu? ICOP 10. Kalau tak silap, ICOP 10 is indoor air quality. Or you mean ICOP 2010. So under the ICOP 2010 indoor air quality lain. Indoor air quality dia ada 3 benda kita akan tengok. So dalam indoor air quality kita akan tengok sama ada you ada biological hazard, chemical hazard or physical hazard. Biological hazard is whereas if you have any fungus, any mold, any bacteria or any virus. And then the physical hazard, what is the humidity, what is the temperature, and all. Chemical hazard is whether you have a CO2, NO2, all those indoor air quality punya component inside. That is indoor air quality. Lain. Yang kita cerita sekarang adalah the chemical. So, yang kita sekarang cerita adalah the aerosol ke, the dust ke, keluar daripada chemical guna. So, to make it this way, dalam lab akan ada 2 ventilation system. One ventilation system is aircon. So, tugas aircon is to make us feel comfort, rasa sejuk. The air inside the aircon will recirculate. That's why kita rasa sejuk. Anything related to aircon or ventilation system, kita nama is indoor air quality problem. But any, for example, like standing fan ke, exhaust system ke, yang mechanical exhaust system yang you pasang, ataupun fume hood ke, ataupun any hood yang you nampak in front of the screen now, that is to control chemical. So, hygiene tech 2, dia akan check the engineering control in which the engineering control purpose is to reduce the chemical contaminate. So, dia adalah 2 benda yang berlainan. So, adakah aircon boleh guna untuk hazardous chemical? Tak boleh. That's why if your company or your lab are handling the hazardous chemical, aircon boleh on because that is comfort, that is indoor air quality problem. But you need to handle the hazardous chemical inside the fume hood. So it's 2 different things. I hope I answer your question, Muhammad Idris. And, oh, this is very long. CHRA was, allow me to read out loud. CHRA was planned, but the assessment cover, so from Puan Hayati. CHRA was planned, but the assessment covered the whole hospital. Very limited time in one department, pathology department. If we need to plan the assessment done in the pathology department, will be a fully optimized in limited time. What is your advice so that the report actually will cover across the pathology department, choose a certain area or certain chemicals? Okay, there are a few things that we can do. Usually when it comes to the lab, of course, kalau terbaiknya, we do a full CHRA report. Kalau tak boleh, you can do by phase, which is you can start from, so you let the CHRA assessor to look in at your chemical register list. Based on the chemical register list, kita akan start dulu dari the first CHRA on the prioritize the first CHRA on a certain area or certain department. That is number 1. Number 2 is the CHRA assessor may also suggest you to do a self-assessment. Wow, kita tunggu baca ke, kita tunggu rotate ke, sampailah semua lab boleh cover. Maksudnya, for the first CHRA, dia akan buat untuk certain department. Okay? We will prioritize those which is the most hazardous. But at the same time, the CHRA assessor will also cadangkan the type of the training for your staff to at least do a self-assessment. The very basic one on the CHRA, at least you do that. Then we will continuously do the full CHRA for the rest of the area. So this is what we apply, especially to institution yang banyak-banyak lab ataupun hospital yang banyak-banyak lab. So this is how we apply because like one time, one off, you nak buat CHRA mungkin tak dapat. So especially when you have the OSH committee, you might wanted to activate the OSH committee to tell them that you need a safe chemical handling training. So under the safe chemical handling training is where as you will be taught or at least how to do the self-assessment on the CHRA. Okay. What about the baseline health surveillance? So is it must for the employee when they first join? The best is kalau institution tu ada chemical hazard, then kita memang akan cadangkan dalam kita punya CHRA report to have the baseline health surveillance program to the employees who pakar handle this chemical in this lab. Faham tak? So that's why dalam regulation, dalam akta dia cakap chemical, whichever the chemical is hazardous to health, they are not supposed to use until the written assessment has been conducted by the assessor. So maksudnya, if you wanted to apply for the job, it has to be presumed that that workplace already conduct a CHRA, di mana dalam CHRA itu kita akan cadang tempat ini hazard. So untuk next new employee, you kena ada health surveillance untuk adanya baseline sebelum dia join company tu. Now that seeing a lot of institution, you haven't done the CHRA yet. So what you need to do is, you have two things that you need to do. Number one is, you have to emphasize the importance of the CHRA. Number two is, you need to claim your right at least to have the baseline of the health surveillance from your employee. So sometimes the employee, they akan confuse the health surveillance and a health examination. Because health examination yang mana kita akan pre-employment health examination, kita usually they don't have the particular like parameter. But the health surveillance, usually we will have a certain parameter that we wanted to test. So there are two different things. Okay. And what else? I think that's all the questions that I answered. Any more questions that you wanted to ask? I hope that I shared that. And honestly, it is very difficult, especially as a science officer in the analytical lab. I realized that it is not only people from the institution who are joining us today. Alhamdulillah, I also can see that people from the hospital are joining. And then I understand a little bit background of you. Having in the industry for some years, that is what we realized, that lab is the one usually people akan overlook. But lab is the one people exposing to the chemical the most. All right. So that I hope that this sharing today would help you to at least understand a little bit why CHRA is important, because this is where we help you to organize or manage a sustainable chemical management in your lab. That's all from me. Thank you.
All right, okay, thank you so much, Dr. Vivien, for the very, very insightful and interesting presentation. I think
There is other
questions. Yeah, there is, I think, two last questions. Can we go on that? What is the best suitable ingredient in the chemical spillage kit that we want to use in the lab? How to choose?
Okay, so chemical spillage kit ada banyak jenis, Puan Fatimah. So saya tak tahu lab awak yang mana. Kalau you nak, you can, this is my email address, I can suggest, but again, I have to look at the overall chemical that you use in the lab, then only I can suggest the best for you, because the chemical spillage kit ada banyak. And usually if you conduct a CHI or if you have a consultant to do the walkthrough for you, contohlah, dalam lab awak ada 50 chemical. So kalau kita on paper, theoretically, different chemical have a different chemical spillage kit that you need to purchase. But on practical, this is non-practicable because the employer are not going to buy 2 or 3 different types of the chemical spillage kit. So what we do is, we will look at the chemical hazard, and we will also look into the chances of which chemical is the most hazardous and most likely to spill. Then kita akan cadangkan the type of the chemical spillage kit. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. If you wish to have more guidance on how to choose the right chemical spillage kit, you can email me so that I will guide you further. Is the result of the passive chemical exposure monitoring valid to use? Okay, Fatima, the passive chemical exposure monitoring using the batch monitor, usually hygiene tech one, what they do is, kalau anda kata that particular chemical adanya alat, let's say the batch monitor untuk monitor, yes kita akan guna. Tetapi kita akan cross check juga dengan kita punya exposure monitoring kit. So contoh dalam lab tu dia guna banyak solvent. Alright, so there is a list of the solvent that they use. So kalau ikut CEM tu dia kena buat at least 2 ke 3 method. Okay, it means that they have to do 2 ke 3 guna 2 ke 3 charcoal tube untuk buat, which is very costing. So what the hygiene tech 2 will do, or even the CHRA will do is, kalau dia ada alat, they will use the batch monitor to confirm which solvent should be proceed with the active chemical exposure monitoring. Alright, so boleh guna ke tak? Boleh. Cuma dalam masuk dalam report, kita masih perlu yang analytical report. Sebab apa? Sebab now we are working in the lab, then we understand the fact that sometimes the batch monitor, their sensitivity level only up to certain value. So lepas certain value, kita hanya boleh guna AS ke GCMS ke untuk capture the value to have the real concentration. The batch monitor could only be a qualitative method to tell that, oh, ada, oh, tak ada. That's it. Faham kan? Alright, so I hope I answer your question.
Okay, I think that's all the question in the chat box. So I think before we wrap up our webinar, I'd like to also ask one question. This is actually a question from a friend of mine, chemist Hazli Falina from Faculty of Pharmacy UKM. She asked, Doctor, if you can give some tips on how to pass the exam with NIOSH.
Alamak.
NIOSH is getting tougher nowadays, so any tips from you?
You know, you have to know what you do and do only what you know. You have to know exactly what you do as a CHRA assessor. You have to wearing the cap as a CHRA assessor. That's number one. And number two is, during the presentation, you have to know, you only tell what you know. So maksudnya sebab kadang-kadang dalam, this one can off record when we do the presentation, the things that we wanted to look into is, you know what exactly, you have to wear the cap as a CHRA assessor. Sometimes the science officer who went for the CHRA is what we encourage because kita nak, because science officer that you know your lab more than any one of us. But whenever science officer present, you are wearing the cap of a science officer, which is tak betul. You have to wear the cap as a CHRA assessor, if you get what I mean. Because let's say for the science officer, you will be thinking that dalam 100 chemical yang awak guna, 100 tu bahaya. Science officer. But as a CHRA assessor cap, and you have to do the assessment, and for the 100 chemicals that you use, as a CHRA assessor, we won't say that 100 is hazard, but the risk level will be different. So you have to wearing the cap as a CHRA assessor. And when it comes to the cadangan, it has to cadangan from the perspective of a CHRA assessor, not from the perspective of the science officer. Faham tak maksud saya? So I think, and also know what exactly a CHRA assessor is when you pass the exam. I know some of you might already try many times. Just keep trying. And because by doing so, you will understand the CHRA better. I don't mind to you PM me if you wanna.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vivien. I think the idea is we cannot be biased.
Cannot. Many times the science officer will be biased towards something. I give you an example. There are science officer when present the CHRA were saying that we want to do the CM, chemical exposure monitoring, on this chemical. But when we check back, this chemical is only moderate risk, and this chemical doesn't sound rational to proceed with the CM. When we ask, then the candidate saying that, oh, because this chemical every time when we use is very expensive, and we want to find a way to not using this chemical. This is not the perspective of the CHRA assessor. Because if this hazard is moderate, what is the stand of you to cadangkan for the chemical exposure? Doesn't make sense. So it has to base on the CHRA perspective.
Yep. Okay. I think that's all the questions. Thank you so much, Dr. Vivien, for the presentation. And from your presentation, I think we can see that you are very enthusiastic and you're very passionate on the topics. And we're glad that we have you in the webinar, and we hope to see you soon. And for the participants, you can fill up the form for the certificate, and also you can give a suggestion from the link in the chat box. So thank you so much, Dr. Vivien, once again, and to all the participants who joining us today. I think the highest that we get today is around 300 plus just now. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you soon.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you very much. Inshallah. Thank you. Bye-bye.